So now we're going to introduce the idea of something called a residual. So a residual is the difference between the observed y value and the predicted y value. The reason there's a difference is because whenever we make our best fit line, it's always off by a little bit, and that's because our best fit line is never perfect because our scatter plot is never completely straight. There's always a little bit of a gap between the point and our line. So the residual is the difference between the observed y value, which is what comes from the table, and our predicted y value, which is what comes from our equation. So the equation is what we expected to happen, and the table is what actually happened. And so whenever you take the value from the table and you subtract the value from the equation, you get the residual. And so your calculator can make a residual plot. It can actually show you what the residuals are. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. I have actually already put in this data into the calculator. Instead of doing 2007, 2008, I just did 7, 8, 9, just so I wouldn't have to scroll down to 2007 when I looked at the table. So it's already in there. So let's go ahead and do stat calc. And then we're going to go down to number 4. We'll do our linear regression. We've got L1 and L2 already ready to go for our x's and y's. And I'm going to store the equation into y1 so that it'll create a x and y table for me. And we'll go ahead and do calculate. So here it gives me the slope about 5.95 and the y-intercept of about 8.5. Well, not about, it just is 8.5. Jot those down. Okay. Now it doesn't show it, but the calculator does create a list of residuals. If we press second stat, you can see right there we now have a list called resid. That's the residuals. And I want to graph that. So I'm going to do second y equals, and I'm going to go ahead and go to plot 1. And plot 1 was graphing L1 and L2. I am now going to make plot 1 graph L1 and the residuals. So let's clear this out. We'll do second stat, and we'll select option 7, which are our residuals. Okay, make sure it looked like I had plot 2 turned on. Yep, let me turn plot 2 off. I just want to graph one of these. So I'm just going to graph plot 1. To get a really good window for your scatter plots, we can do zoom and then number 9, which is zoom stat. That's a good window for us. And there's a plot of our residuals. So let's see what these residual values are. I'm going to press the trace button up here at the top next to graph. And you can see that first point for 7, it gives us a residual value of 12.8. So if we go look at our table said that for 7, the value was 63. That's how many goals were actually scored, was 63. If we look at our graph or our equation, the table our equation created, our equation predicted 50.1. So our predicted was 50.1, and our actual was 63, which is off by about 12, which is what the residual said, 12.8. If I go over to 8, the residual says negative 12. A residual value for 8 is negative 12. If I do stat edit and I look at 8, our table gave us 44. 44 was the actual number. If I do second graph and go look at our prediction, it's 56. 44 to 56 is a difference of about 12. So you can see the residual plot is telling us how far off were we with our equation. Let's go ahead and go back to our scatter plot and let's graph L1 and L2. So I'm going to do second list and select L2. Let's just do our regular scatter plot. So I'll do zoom 9 again. And there's our scatter plot, and you can see there's a gap between what we have for our line and what the actual point is. I'm going to screenshot this so I can mark it up a little bit. So our first point had a residual of 12.8. What that means is the distance between our point and our line is about 12.8. Our second residual was about 12. negative 12 because it's below the line. That means that distance right there is about negative 12. And that's what the residual means. How far away from the graph are these residual points? Okay, so what this means is because our residuals were mostly around the line above and below, we can say that our residual plot is clustered close together. So a linear model fits the data well. We saw that not only from the residual plot, but we also saw it whenever we actually graphed the scatter plot and put the best fit line on there. The best fit line goes right up through the middle of the data. And so that's another piece of information we can get from a best fit line. The residual plot tells us how close was our line to predicting what actually happened in the table.